do we deal with those pesky what if thoughts that come into our minds and stomp them out? That's the topic we're going to address today on Flourish-Meant. I'm your host, Tina Yeager. Flourish-Meant is sponsored by Access More. Today, I have a sweet friend, a wonderful author, Renee Leonard Kennedy. She loves God, family, friends, and those she's yet to meet. She is author of After the Flowers Die, Encouragement for Those Walking Through Life After Loss. Welcome, Renee. I am so excited about talking with you on this topic of stomping out those negative, pesky thoughts that get us trapped, those what if thoughts. So welcome to Flourish-Meant, my friend.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Tina. I really appreciate your opening up your podcast to so many people.
In this second portion of our conversation with author and thoughtful discussion leader and speaker Renee Leonard Kennedy, we're going to dive into some more practical things about stomping out the what ifs that might enter your mind. Renee, can you talk about a time when you really struggled with what ifs yourself and how you moved through that into experiencing God's joy more fully?
Well, I will speak to you as somebody who was an atheist, and I lived in what ifs because my children, I had started going to church as an atheist, so I really stuck out. But you know how God is very seeking our hearts. And I took my children because I thought it was a really good place for them to grow up, and it was a good place for them, honestly, to get some babysitting on Sundays because I needed a break. Um, but in all this, I realized with my children, particularly when they're little, I would live out the worst what ifs case scenario of something happening to my child. And I would walk through what I would do because I'd seen some horrible instances of children, dying because of leukemia. I remember going to this one young lady's little 6-year-old's funeral. And so once you see something like that, you've got to realize that's going to stay with you. Um, but as an atheist, I didn't have the tools to block that, but even as an atheist, God was gracious enough to say at one point, because I was going to church, he said, or he somehow the thought came into me, this is not healthy. This is not good. And I had a lot of Christians who surrounded me. They were saying, I remember my father-in-law at the time, he would say, 80% or 90% of what you worry about never comes true. And it really stuck with me because I was like, oh my goodness, I'm worrying about something that I can't change. I'm worrying about something that might not happen. I need to change this. But as a Christian, it's been deeper times. I tend to, I think we all have some sort of social media, good old internet, social media habit, and I'm a news scroller. I don't scroll social media, and when I'm a news scroller. So my what ifs are, okay, if this happens in the country, then what if? What if this happens? Then what if this happens? And how can I prevent this from happening? Well, I'm little Renee Leonard Kennedy. Last I saw, I can't. I can't save the world. I can't, save the economics. I can't save the United States of America. I have to leave that to God. He's sovereign over everything that happens. So that is where I go. And what I have to do is my accountability partner is my sweet little Lily Joy Kennedy, my daughter who's turned 21. I said to her, I have really got to stop scrolling news at night. It is the worst thing. What we do at night is usually horrendous stuff. Most of us get comfort in a TV show or a media scroll. I've heard it. I'll talk to friends and I'm just, I just scroll, or we even play the online games on our phone. And we know, and it's very common knowledge, that the light source of a phone keeps you up. I think it's like they suggest turning it off an hour beforehand. So I said to her, I need to quit doing this. I just really need to quit doing this. I fail a lot. I fail miserably at this, but this is something, a good practice for me to follow, because my mind, it's an open door when I open it with news scroll, you know.
So I'm hearing you say, watch what you put into your mind, because that's going to
Yes,
trigger that avalanche of what if
right.
thoughts.
And you don't sleep well. Which
Yeah.
really, and then you wake up the next morning and these problems have nagged you all throughout the night. And I am sorry, I interrupted you. You go ahead. You were
Oh
saying something.
no, I was just saying,
Yeah.
so it's also really important to think about when you're going to allow yourself to be exposed
Right.
to any thoughts that might be negative. I mean, we can't filter it out all the time, but you
Yeah.
can at least try to limit it right before you go to bed, which is your time when you should be allowing God to give you restoration through your sleep
Right.
time.
Right. Oh, definitely. And Jordan Rayner, he's the author who did Redeeming Your Time, talks about scheduling your day, and he puts his phone away at 5, puts it away, cuts it off, chooses not to pick it up after that. He relies on his friends to tell him any of the outside news. And this is a former guy who worked on one of the administrations. So, I mean, if anybody was going to be a news junkie, it would have been him. But I talked to one of my other daughters who went away to college last year. I said, develop a nighttime routine that is life-giving. And I think that's really important that we think about this. Now, when you have little babies, this is really hard, and even little toddlers. But as we grow older, what am I doing to signal I'm going low key? Am I, I love hot tea. And so I drink chamomile, lavender tea. The lights are low. Um, I try not to pick up my phone. I take a shower before I go to bed. I put on my pajamas. I pray to the Lord. I make a conscious effort to kneel beside the bed. And sometimes it's just my hands up, groaning of the spirit. But all these things signal to me it's time to sleep. It's time to rest. And there's sweetness in developing a nighttime routine that's regular. I think that way we don't have to think about it. It becomes habit. And sometimes I throw a devotional in there too, but that's really a good idea. So
I'm hearing you say that we need to lay those what ifs down at the end
mm,
of our day and
mm.
reshift our focus back to who instead of what.
Yes. Well, you said that very succinctly. So that is very beautiful. It is always back to the Lord. That is where we end the what ifs.
When you
Right.
transitioned from being an atheist to being a Christian, how did that process of transitioning from what to who work out for you? Was that a difficult transition to make, or did you find that it was easy and smooth? How did that go?
Well, I think it depends on perhaps your personality type. And as you know, Tina, I'm rather rambunctious. So I'm a rebellious person. But the Lord was really, really good to me. And I noticed at one point, my pastor had said, I want, have you ever thought about just praying for stewardship? And I'm going, okay, I can get that. That's a financial word. I like that. I can pray for that. I had no idea what he was going to yank away from me, but he yanked them away in the most precious, precious ways. So, to see that the Lord God of the universe cares about the worries in my mind, the things that are complicating my life and complicating my relationships and truly messing it up. I mean, he comes and rescues us. I myself I am a long-term piece of work. And so he's still, but I think most of us are. I do think there's radical change for a lot of people. I mean, just the mere fact that I actually said, I'm going to believe in you, was a radical change for me. Because I mean, I was the worst of these. I was very much like Paul. I didn't kill anybody. But I mocked people who believed, in the Christian faith, and I was raised in it. So, never, this is a side note, but never ever think because someone's mocking Christianity that you cannot pray enough and the Lord cannot work, because he does. He does. He's strong. He's sovereign.
That's so good. And
Mm.
how God redeems us from each of those places that we so worry are out of our control, and they are.
Mhm.
Everything's out
Mhm.
of our control, but He
Right.
can kind of redeem all of that. And some of the things that you have mentioned that we have what ifs about,
Mhm.
shame over all
Yeah.
those things that we may have done or been in the past. God
Yeah.
redeems all of that. So the what ifs that we have centered around how we present ourselves and what other people think of us, God can
Mhm.
redeem all of that and make it about Him. And the things that you also mentioned are about health and
Yeah.
about finances and
Yeah.
about our children. They're real fears.
Yeah.
However, God is bigger than each of those, and we have to kind of really work through that. How how do we get past the wanting to control it and being able to surrender it? Did you have any practical tips that we can do to make that shift happen in our minds?
Well, that's a good question, because I think we're all very resistant to that. I noticed something, and I hadn't heard about it, but I don't know if you've watched The Chosen,
Yes.
but yes, what I loved about that, all of a sudden I went, I noticed the way they held their hands out, because I'm a big, when I like to do all sorts of demonstrative praise, whether I'm in the field or at church or whatever. That's not me bragging. That's just who I am. I'm just wired up to use my arms and talk with my hands. But I watched them, and I really liked it, because the first thing they did is get up in the morning. And I love that idea of just, yeah, I do my stretches in the morning in the bed, and I'm just thinking, I'm just open to what the Lord is. But then I set up and I put my hands out and I said, and my pastor encouraged us this year to just pray, Lord, how can we please you today? So I think just taking that moment before you hit the ground and do whatever, get your coffee and then go do your Bible or whatever you do. I think it's very, very important, because it is the first fruits of our day.
So doing something
Mm.
tangible, because
Mhm.
we are physical people, is really important to get it out of our heads. We need to talk
Yeah.
it through with believers. We need to put it on paper. We need to, in prayer, do some kind of physical motion or activity
Mhm.
that shows that we're turning it over to God so that we can make that shift happen. Because it's not going to happen in the sanctuary of our minds. That's where
No.
the mental battle, like you said earlier, the mental battle is lost when it's kept
Mhm.
in secret, right?
Yes, yes, the mind creep. He's a mind creeper too. The enemy or our thoughts, they creep and they bloom, and that is what we want to come against and be beautiful warriors and fight against. So,
This has been
yeah.
a wonderful conversation, Renee. Tell us a little bit about your recent release from Endgame Press, After the Flowers Die.
Well, it is a gift book, and I'm really excited for it, in the sense of I am a woman later in life, and it is my first book that got published. So, in other words, hashtag don't give up on your dreams, or don't give up, period. Because as I said, I started getting back in the writing world at 2018, 2019, when I'd stopped at 26. And a lot of decades, a lot of water under that bridge. So I was offered this idea. I was working with Victoria Dorisstock as a life coach, and she's excellent. And then one day she looked at me and she goes, "How about this?" And I was just blown over that I got the opportunity to write it. But what I noticed with a lot of grief books is they're long, or they're too long. Um, and I wanted to write something that could go to the Christian market as well as the general market, because a lot of houses that pastors go to, or a lot of houses we go to, the people are not believers. So I want to introduce the idea of the Lord, but I also want it to be winsome enough where they don't feel, it's not a devotional where there's scripture, this and that. So I just tell stories, and I have a ponder point, much like you do at the end of whenever a speaker speaks. You wrap it up so beautifully, action steps that we can take, and it's short. And I gave the titles of the chapters kind of silly names, some of them, because there's a little bit of humor that we need to inject. Not, and this is not a book you give. You can give it after loss right away, but people are not even thinking about picking up a book. But you can have it and just put it on a coffee table, and eventually they might get to it. The most people I've talked to who have come up to me said, I gave it to a friend, it's been X amount of months. Because when you're in the throes of grieving, it's too much to even open a book. It's just too much. So it's my hope that it reaches people that way, and that they're lifted up. But I do have a really great story if we have time for that.
Sure.
Okay. There was a young lady named Danny who was working on my farm, working with some of the landscaping. And I'd never met her before. She was working with the landscaping team, and she came in to use the bathroom, and she comes out of it and she has this look on her face, and she goes, "Did you write that book?" And I'm going, because I have no signs, there's no signs that say here. And I looked at her, and she goes, "Yeah." She goes, "I made the connection because my mom got that book when it came out, and I saw your picture, and she made the match up." And she goes, "And it's you." And so it was like one of those moments, the Lord saying, "Renee, okay." And I asked her where she was from. She was not from my city. She was far away. So it's moments like this that the Lord sees us. And I think that's even in the what ifs, he comes to us. And I think in that moment with books like that or comments like that, people telling stories, I think that's the way the Lord shows that he's Emmanuel. He's with us.
Mm. How can people connect with you, Renee, and get a copy of After the Flowers Die for those that they feel might be blessed by the message there?
I have a website, ReneeLeonardKennedy.com, and they can get the book After the Flowers Die from Renee Leonard Kennedy on Amazon or in Game Press.
I hope that all of you listening were greatly blessed by this conversation and feel more equipped to stomp out your own what if thoughts. And of course, I also hope that you come back for the next episode of Flourish-Meant.